Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the first class in our three-part masterclass series titled Intentional Project Engagement, Creating Faster Project ROI. Starting today, our goal will be to provide you with the information that will help you create your own business advantage. My name is Ken Waddell. I am publisher of Parcel Media. I'll be your moderator for the day. We are glad that you could take some time out of your busy day to attend today. Before we get started, first I'd like to extend a special thank you to our webinar sponsors, Link Supply Chains and Life in Balance. And I also want to make sure to take a quick moment to let you know if you do have any questions, you can submit them at any time during the presentation. Simply submit the question in the chat box at the bottom. You'll notice that. And our speakers will be getting to as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar. Real quickly, I'd like to introduce today's panel of speakers. Rain Kansman, CEO, owner, and personal coach at Life in Balance. You can find him on the web at getlifeinbalance.com. Lisa Dubbs, leader in the food and beverage industry with over 25 years of experience in sales and merchandising for both Fortune 100 companies and private companies. And Wade Wickus, CEO of Link Supply Chains and host of the new podcast, Supply Chains, The Secret Sauce. So with that, let's get started and jump right into the class. Rain Kansman, take it away.
All right, thank you, Ken, appreciate it. Thanks for joining us. So today we want to talk about a few things when it comes to intentional project engagement. Our goals for today and the agenda are, we're going to start with transition and change, which seems to start almost everything. Most of us are dealing with a lot of transition and change this year. We want to specifically talk about how it impacts the return on investment. Then we'll move into how that ties into a typical project and team and how collaboration with that team really helps move the project forward effectively. We're going to share some research with you on the cost of poor engagement. And we'll talk about a feedback process, not your typical way. And then we'll tie it up with intentional project engagement and give you some real takeaways. So if we look at, again, the world today is in a transition phase, and it seems like, I don't know, ever since every year seems to be moving faster as far as change. But as a company, when you introduce a new process, a new product, or a new system, it creates a transition for you and for your company and team. And so as a leader, when you're doing that, we need to understand how to deal with that transition. And one of my favorite models with that is this William Bridges model on transitioning. And it actually starts with an ending, because when we go through a transition, the old way is now ending. If we go next, we move into the neutral zone and then on to new beginnings. So let me walk you through a situation. At one point, I made a change in jobs where I went from a very comfortable job that I've been at for 10 years and was leading a staff of 15 to 20 learning and development folks. And at that point, I went into a new job where I was actually in charge of a team of 287 folks. It was a 24/7 operation, and it was in bad shape. During that change, not only a transition I went through, because all that comfortability was now ending, right? And so I was in a new area with that I was not as familiar with. Well, my team wasn't as familiar with where we were going and what direction I was moving us in either. So when it comes to that, we need to really understand and respect that something's ending that these people valued. Something's ending that they're going to give up. They may have been the very best at whatever process you were using in the past, and now we're moving into a new way, and they don't feel as valuable. And maybe they feel threatened that they're going to lose their job. So the endings, as a leader, we need to really kind of tie into that and understand where your team is with that ending, what they're giving up. One of the neatest examples I saw is we had an IT department that was going from handling all of the functions right in-house. They had the hardware, they had everything that they were doing, and going to a regional cable process where now a lot of what they knew and understood as the way of doing things was all changing, and all they were going to have to deal with was the monitors, the laptops, the PCs, which was a lot different. So they ended up having a funeral for the old hardware with hats and cake and all these things. And it sounds kind of silly, but allowed them to grieve that change so that they can move forward. We get into the neutral zone, and the neutral zone, sometimes called the valley of despair, people can get lost in that area, okay? And so there we want to move through that in order to move through that efficiently, we need to keep track to where everybody's at, provide assurances that the new way is going to work, and they'll be just as valuable in the new process. So we can reduce uncertainty and talk about why we started this process or took on this new process in the beginning, maybe to save money or whatever. Once we get the team through that, then we're in the new beginnings. And in new beginnings, we embrace the new reality. We shape and reinforce the future. One of the neatest things I saw somebody do is you give people more responsibility, whatever responsibility you can give them at that point, because that way they have something they can control. They just went through a whole area where they didn't feel like they had any control over anything, and that helps them move through. So as we go through and do that, and we look through it, that ties us into project effectiveness. And I'm going to turn it over to Wade Wickus at this time. Wade?
Thanks, Rain. So when we look at projects, which is the next slide, we're going to think about, all the RACIs and all the typical things that you have in a project, who's accountable for what, the milestones, for what purpose everybody's doing their different roles in the project, and having the executive engagement, all those sort of things in the top kind of right of that slide that are very normal and typical to any project. But what we really want to talk about is how we can add intentionality with getting through that neutral zone faster. And that intentionality is on engagement. And so some of the ideas that we're going to talk about and think about are intentional recognition, like Rain mentioned in his story about his experience. If you can intentionally build recognition into the beginning of the project, just to recognize all the people and how important it was that you got to that point. Yes, we've got a new beginning we're working towards, but just intentionally putting a date on the calendar and putting a meeting around, hey, let's celebrate how we got here, because that gives fuel to the people that helped get there, as well as just understanding that there was a process to get there, and it was great, and there will be an equal greatness when we execute the next leg. The next part is that intentional connection. So getting with each group to make sure that there are milestones that we're really looking at tackling and blocking those roadblocks, really addressing those conflicts that occur in a project. So intentionally putting in your project plan connection points. But those connection points may also include collaboration, which Lisa's going to talk about in a few minutes here, and also about feedback lanes, which Rain's going to talk about in a little bit as well. So intentionally putting on that project plan, the collaboration points, the touch points, the connection touch points to understand the roadblocks that are going on, and the feedback lanes to make sure and ensure that you're getting the proper feedback on your project getting to the end. And so what happens, typically is you put a project into play, we've all been down the road, and you've got a nice plan and everybody knows their roles and responsibilities, and we're meeting every week to go over all that. But what we don't talk about is, so-and-so is ill, or they've got a family member that's ill and they're having a hard time getting this accomplished, and really getting into those roadblocks that are disconnecting that project from getting to the finish line faster. And so by adding in those markers, we can accomplish getting to the end line a little bit faster. So all that kind of stems around the bottom left, which is a very, famous book, Mr. Lencioni's Five Dysfunctions of a Team. So having a high trust team may not always be possible. There might be teams with low trust in your project plan. So really developing a plan to work with those lower trust teams intentionally to build that accountability and commitment, to understand how we can get them to the next level. Because otherwise that's going to delay your flow through the neutral zone, and it's going to delay your return on investment. So intentionally and consciously being aware that, hey, this is the team that we're going to have challenges with, and then putting a plan together of how to lift them or help them work on their strengths to get through those issues and move towards your new beginning faster. So that's the intentionality we want to bring into project planning. And Lisa, I believe you're next with collaboration.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. When Wade talked about collaborative teams and getting a cohesive team together, when building a collaborative team, it's important to consider all options, invite questions, work together to solve issues, offer ideas, options for the group to examine. So everybody has their say in what's going on. As a leader, it's our responsibility to create an atmosphere where team members can respect each other's differences. Explore, understand new ideas. It's really important for people to see what other people are thinking, what their ideas are. It's important when listening to understand to what the person is expressing, and invite team members to expand upon it without judgment. Ask questions, throw out ideas, invite support, ask for different crazy things. No idea is ever too crazy. When you're with a team and you want people to work, crazy is a good thing. It kind of reminds me about the story about the orange. There were two sisters that were arguing over an orange. They both wanted the orange, but there was only one. After much conflict and nobody was really listening to the other about anything, they decided to compromise and cut the orange in half. As one sister started to walk away to peel the orange and get to the juicy segments that she wanted to have, she looked back and saw her sister grating the peel of her half of the orange into her muffin batter. And as they both looked at each other, they could have compromised, they could have both shared the same orange. Most of the time, conflict occurs because people aren't willing to talk and share ideas or their needs. Rain?
Thank you, Lisa. Wow, now I want an orange. And thank you, Wade. Great stuff as we move forward. Collaboration is huge when it comes to dealing with teams and dealing with communication effectively. So collaboration, the collaborative mindset also creates engagement. And the reason it creates engagement is because you're getting people involved in a conversation, involved in the decisions. And the value of engagement, we have a slide here from some research that's really interesting. What does a lack of engagement cost? And this comes from Donald O. Clifton and Marcus Buckingham when they did some research for their book, Now Discover Your Strengths, as they were part of the Gallup organization. And they looked at the US population, work population, and they divided employees into three different types. One was engaged, and those are people that are loyal and productive, the people that you want on your team, right? And that was about 29% of the workforce. Then there's a group that's not engaged, just putting in their times. Those are the folks that when I went in the office and say, how things going? And they'd say, just staying below the radar or living the dream, right? They're there, they're putting in their time, but for some reason they're not committed. They're not engaged. And then they actively disengage. Those are the ones that are unhappy, spreading their discontent. And that's about 16%. So if I do my math right, 71% of the employees are either not engaged or actively disengaged. So if you take a typical 300-person company, right, 15 million in payroll, it's about 50,000 per person, right, per full-time employee, including benefits and that. So that's not too far off. Or maybe even as we look at that, and then we assume that the engaged full-time employees are working at 100%, and the other two groups are at about 50%, which most people that study this think that's pretty generous. The cost, annual cost, to a 300-person organization is $5.2 million. That's real dollars, or 35% of payroll. So how can we change that? Well, one of the ways is to look at it as a leader, right? As a leader, those people and your approach is essential in driving engagement. Let me tell you a little story. There's a story about this group of people, small work group, and they needed a ladder to do the job. And so if the leader said, hey, Fred, go get a ladder, I think there's one in the shed, and Fred goes to the shed and he can't find a ladder, what's he gonna do? He's gonna come back to the leader, right? What about just changing your vocabulary a little and saying, hey, we need a ladder for this project. Who would like to volunteer and go get the ladder? With that scenario, if Fred volunteers, he would be more likely to go looking for the ladder and not come back to you again, because he'd be more engaged in the project. Small pieces, a little different in conversation, but that's what I'm talking about. To really understand where your team's at, you need to have an effective feedback process, okay? Feedback process I want to share with you, again, being intentional about that feedback. Let me start. If you don't want the feedback, don't ask for it. That's the first place to get our minds right. We need the feedback. Feedback is a gift. So process for feedback needs to have integrity, right? It needs to be something of integrity. They need to be able to trust it. You need to encourage discussion and be thankful for what you get. Reinforce their role and importance with the organization so that they feel more comfortable giving that feedback. Relentlessly solve any gray issues. If there's something, a misunderstanding about what works or what doesn't work, or what's behind the closed doors, right? And we need to cover that. And then feedback checkpoints. Make sure you have them set. They can, in talking about being independent of leadership and consistent, what they're talking about is the more consistent that they have that process, the more people trust it. And if you can get some people who aren't necessarily in leadership, that they're more comfortable giving that feedback to without reciprocation, you know, that's also helpful, right? So with my clients, I spend a lot of time in rooms evaluating conversations, evaluating how they deal with and talk to their team members. We use anonymous surveys to understand their work climate. And then we try and create a safe feedback process. I worked for a large organization, had a work climate survey, and it was sad because I was part of the group that was bringing that. I thought the survey was a great idea, and I was part of the group that was actually bringing it out and accumulating the individual responses. But the team, the employees did not trust that was being held with integrity. They did not trust that their leaders wouldn't get a chance to look at that and come back at them. So we never got any information. We spent a ton of money, but we never really got good information. They got information they could use and put up on their billboards as, yes, top 100 company, because here's what our employees say, because it was all a bunch of malarkey, right? So again, they need to have that trust. When we ask for feedback, we need to be receptive. We need to listen to the feelings and content. If somebody says, hey, how you doing? And they say, fine. Are they really fine? Check it out. We need to check it out because we can come back to burn you later. Control your responses when you get feedback. If something's hurtful, don't get defensive. Ask them why. Clarify, right? Intently probe to understand where they're at. Consciously thank them sincerely for the feedback, and I mean sincerely. Be aware of what you can use. And so what I talk about there is it is feedback, right? And some feedback comes in and it's not necessarily something that you can use. Make sure you do follow up on that though, so that they understand what actions you took, and then commit to that action in areas you want to change, follow through timely, and then ask people for help turning it around. One of the greatest things I saw was when my boss came to me after I had given them feedback and said, well, Rain, help me out. Can you help me make this happen? What do we need to do? Man, I was 100. I'd run through walls for that individual, right? All right. So I want to land the plane at this time. We have 3 key takeaways. The first one, again, reminder that intentional means we're doing it with a clear purpose or focus. You got to really want to do it. So you got to be all in when you're doing it. And the first takeaway is understand the benefits and challenges of the project, the change, and intentionally plan for the challenges in your project plan. What obstacles might you run into? And again, that goes into finding out from your team, having that feedback process, having a collaborative way of getting that information. Number 2, awareness of your team's commitment through the change process. I remember rushing a project through because we thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. And I mean, we almost had a revolt, a complete mutiny, because we hadn't brought them on board. They loved it once we finally explained it, but all we're doing is pushing this, right? Almost like they're numbers. And number 3, intentionally be collaborative mindset, create a dynamic with multi-channel feedback processes that have integrity, right? And here's where the secret sauce lies. Create your business advantage through higher intentional engagement. Engagement is the key. That's the difference between compliance and commitment, right? Because the chicken complied when it laid the eggs, but the pig was all in when they made bacon out of it. We need that kind of commitment to move forward. So I'm going to turn it back over to our moderator, Ken. Do we have any questions from the audience, Ken?
Yeah, it looks like we've got a few here. Again, I won't necessarily point them to anyone. I'll let you guys decide who's the best person to take the question. First one, realistically, how long does it take to create a collaborative team?
I'll take that one. You know, like Rain was talking about feedback, and it's important to explain the process. You know, when I did my experience, when I had to try to create a collaborative team, it took months. In the beginning, it was a disaster. It just took time to do this. I had the purchasing and the marketing department. We all had the same end goal, but nobody was really working together. And all, like Rain talked about, the feedback, all I could hear during the day was nobody listens to us. You go to different meetings, but nobody's really hearing what we're saying. Nobody's listening, almost again like the story about the orange. And so what I did was I actually took the group and I put them in the conference room and I said, no work. And what we're going to do, our goal is to come up with items and deals and stuff for our flyer. We're working months ahead of time, but how can we help each other? And I said, we're not going to work. Just tell me what you did this weekend. Where did you go? What did you eat? What restaurant did you go to? Tell me what you ordered. Tell me what your friends ordered. Where did you go? And got people to talk about what they were doing and then get them to understand that it was okay to be different. It was okay to come up with an idea and how can I help the next person? So it took months of getting everybody together, get them to open up. But one day, it actually happened, I could overhear the team members talking in their offices about how they could help one another and how to do this. And eventually, we didn't need a meeting to go to. They started doing it all on their own. So it takes time. You have to listen to the feedback, and you really have to let people have buy-in and with no judgment. And it turns out to be a lot of fun.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. Number 2 here. Let's see. What are the most effective ways to get feedback during transition that you have experienced?
All right. I can take that one, Ken. Thanks. So a couple of the ways that I saw that were really effective. One was when you had a smaller team, say you only had a dozen or so on your team. This one gentleman was really good at Monday morning huddles. So it was just a 15-minute, get everybody together. Nobody sat down. We just stood there with our coffee in the morning, and we kind of went through, what are you hearing? What are you getting? What kind of roadblocks are you running into? Anything that was, and that meeting was specifically for that transition or change and getting that feedback. And he had it recorded, actually, so he didn't have to take his eyes off of anybody. He had it recorded so that he could just answer and clarify if there was anything that was not clear to him as he went through that. With a larger group, I'm old enough to remember suggestion boxes, but I was reminded by my kids that's probably a little old-fashioned. But today, what I saw was surveys that were done anonymously, again through SurveyMonkey, and then the questions and the answers were stored in a cloud-based location where everybody could access them. So it was all real transparent. And those questions needed to be answered daily. So the person responsible for that change or that part of that change would actually be the person that would go in and need to answer those questions. And I know, wow, that's a lot of time. It's important. I mean, that right there not only is communication and clarity, not just for, there's probably, if two people ask the question, there's probably 20 or 30 that want to know the answer to that because they just don't ask, right? And then again, answered those in a timely space. Those are probably the two methods I thought that worked the most effectively, Ken.
Well, that's good. That's good. Thank you very much. Last question we have here. Actually, I know I've dealt with this one myself, so I'd love to know the answer you guys come up with. If you lose a team's commitment, what are some tools to regain their commitment?
Well, I can take a stab at that one. So, when we talk about commitment, it usually falls back on there's something that's causing that issue. So really addressing it. A number of project managers may not be aware of the lack of commitment as they're meeting with all these groups and really just going over the tasks. And so asking just the question about how are you connecting with this group on this issue, or really saying the elephant in the room, and having ears to the ground about things that are not maybe as cohesive as they could be, and just addressing it, because the longer things simmer, the worse it gets. And addressing those issues are really important. For example, in kicking off a WMS project, you've got I remember in my past anyway, you've got your plan, you're kicking it off, you're training individuals on how to use the equipment. But it's not until you ask, is this really working? Does this really work for you? Show me how this works. Take me through the process. And you start to find out that there are nuances that are really frustrating to that team member. And you wouldn't know that if you didn't stop to take the time just to understand. And it's hard on every project to say, oh, I'm going to have time to do that. But intentionally taking time to go and work with somebody on the project is just as important as having a meeting with project team members to really help bring that collaboration and remove that conflict and create greater commitment. Hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully I answered that question a little bit.
All right. Thank you, Wade. I think that was our last question here. So that basically concludes our webinar for today. Thank you, Rain, Lisa, Wade. You guys, that was some great information you delivered. Thank you. Want to take a chance to thank our sponsors. Want to thank our sponsors for today, Link Supply Chains and Life in Balance. They were able to make this webinar complimentary for everyone. If you would like more information on this content, please email at info@linksupplychain.com. Again, that's info@linksupplychains.com. We'll post a recording of this presentation on our website in the very near future. Again, looking ahead, we will have a couple more classes in the master classes, one on November 11th and one on November 18th. Please, you can see the www there. Please register at any time before those dates for those upcoming webinars. And lastly, of course, I'd like to thank everyone for attending today. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your week. Goodbye.
And I'd also like to add too that we will post a recording of this on our website. So if you do want to refer back to anything, please feel free to do so. And if you do need any further information, probably Rain is the best guy to contact, Rain Kansman at getlifeinbalance.com. Thank you again. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.